This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Trying to mentally prepare myself for the holiday season. Coming up on Halloween in a few days, which means lots of screaming kids and banging on doors till about 9 o'clock at night. It's the night every single adult person over the age of 30 dreads. And funny, I remember Halloween being such a bigger deal when I was a kid. Ever since the scamdemic, I've noticed an incredible lack of door-to-door visitations from all the youths. Maybe, I don't know, maybe when everyone's just getting older. When I was a kid, that was actually a big thing in our neighborhood. There were like 8 or 9 of us that were in the same age bracket. So once we all turned 12 or 13, we really didn't trick or treat as much as we used to. But it all just kind of happened at once. There wasn't much overlap. Now we're all grown up. Some of us married. Others kind of just falling off the face of the earth entirely. It's very weird how people come and go in your life. And you don't think much of it when you're young. You're like, I'll see them. Go off to college. Come home to visit the parents. They'll still be there. We'll be in touch. And then you never see them again. That seems to be the world we live in now. People ghost each other pretty frequently and pretend like no one ever existed. I mean, I guess we are in the digital age, so it's not that hard to communicate with people, but if you're like me and you're never on social media, it's difficult. Of course, that's my fault, because I opt to not communicate with people online, but it is what it is. It's better for my overall health. I don't even know how we got off on that subject. One of those FSWR rambles to try and break the ice, I guess. Because Lord knows I can never start a podcast by just greeting the people. Not on this channel. It's not how I roll, brother. I like to get on very obscure topics and see where the conversation goes. Most of the time, nowhere productive. But how's about we turn the conversation around by getting to the topics at hand for today's show? For the Monday installment, we got the classic and contemporary WWE content, another deep dive into the cesspool of retro Raw, which has been a bundle of joy. The show that somehow gets progressively more intolerable with each passing episode. You know, pretty soon we're going to have to do a comment section poll. See what's worse. Retro Raw from 94 to 96, or Nitro from, well, pretty much any time after Starrcade 97. And the whole Hogan Sting debacle that forever destroyed my passion for WCW. Whatever was left of it at the time. If we do survive another 10 years on this channel and we actually do talk about the Monday Night Wars era of wrestling, good God. I don't know how long I'll be able to withstand those Nitros. I'll probably be able to laugh through most of Raw, just because a lot of that bad stuff was masked by the Austins and the Rocks and the Foleys and the Undertakers, the Bretts, the big stars. Like, even Russo's crappy booking can make me laugh a time or two. But these retro Raws, man, it's like compressing a vice grip to the cranium. The pain is slow and torturous. The shows are only 45 minutes. But you just think to yourself, it has to be over soon, right? Well, why don't we dive in and find out on this very special edition of Retro Raw. It's a night of doom and gloom this week in history. It's Halloween, for one. So there was already an impending sense of doom engulfing this show. It wasn't the ghosts or the ghouls. Even scarier, it was the product of bad booking. There were all kinds of terrible Halloween references all over this show, all of which were incredibly unfunny, as you could probably imagine. But as we edge closer to Survivor Series, they open this week's program with the advertised Lex Luger-Bob Backlund match, in an angle that I'm convinced was purely designed just to keep Luger happy. Because, man, you watch Luger on this program for the better half of the last year, he's been far from motivated. He's been swept up in all this million-dollar corporation stuff, feuding with the likes of Tatanka. I mean, at this point, he's just out there going through the motions. There's no passion behind anything he does. He's just there to pick up a paycheck. Meanwhile, you got Backlund still feuding with Brett behind the scenes. I don't think we've ever seen either one of them interact together on Raw yet. Not one promo, not one angle. Apparently they've done some stuff together on Superstars. But I've been very outspoken for a while now how little Bret Hart we've actually seen on Raw since he won the WWF title back in April. God, it's been such a lousy title reign. I mean, I guess if you discount the stuff with Owen. This match was quite literally the definition of two guys going through the motions. It's the most boring, nothing happening TV match in the history of Monday Night Raw. Again, Luger's totally given up. Backlund's doing a fine job working the crazy midlife crisis heel gimmick. But even here, man, it's just two guys having a match with nothing interesting to report on. I did laugh right before their commercial pitch. They got the floor camera showing the aisleway while Backlund's working over Luger. And off in the distance, way back behind the entrance curtain, we see what appears to be a vague silhouette of a figure. Now, of course, this was back before all the cameras were HD, so there's like no possible way to determine who this guy was, even as they're zooming in the camera all the way to show the guy standing there. Vince was somehow able to determine this was Tatanka. I just paused and went, "It is?" Fuck, could have fooled me, dude. I wouldn't have been able to tell. And of course, they come back from break. Tatanka just totally vanishes. Backlund's in there working over Luger for a few minutes. And here's their genius finish they came up with. And one of those only in WWF circa 1994 moments. After Luger starts making his comeback, he catches Backlund with a power slam, and he goes to tease the rack, but from literally out of the void, pops Tatanka. And he hits the ring apron to run a distraction, at which point, Backlund grabs Luger, puts him in one of the worst chicken wing holds I've ever seen. But here's the kicker. He gets Luger on the ground. By all intents and purposes, Luger is defeated. All the ref has to do is ring the bell and call it. This man cannot escape. But no. Instead, Tatanka gets in the ring. He begins to berate Luger and the official. And then while Backlund has Luger trapped in this submission hold, again, Luger is totally helpless. The ref calls for the bell. And it's determined that the winner of this match, via disqualification, is Luger. Because even though Bob Backlund had the match won, Tatanka just randomly decided to hit the ring and cause a blatant DQ because, well, he's an idiot, you see. If I were Backlund in this case, I would have immediately released that hold on Luger, and I would have grabbed this Tatanka, and I would have choked this fucker out cold. That's got to be an all-time horrendous finish, right? Tatanka cost Bob Backlund a match he already had won because he hit the ring and started ganging up on a defenseless Luger. Beyond retarded. And of course, that wasn't even the real story of the angle, because they had the Macho Man run in to fend off Backlund afterwards, after refusing to break the hold. And Vince kept drawing attention to the fact that he could get fined or suspended for doing so, stating that Savage knows he's not permitted to get physically involved with the talent. And, well, I do know we're coming up on the end of Savage's contract status with the WWF. I wonder if they shot that to write him out in storyline. And it sucks, too, because he cut a hell of a promo on Backlund right before they pitched to the infomercial pre-tape. Hell, if I didn't know any better, I'd have thought they were teasing a Backlund Savage program. Of course, the one possible good thing to come out of this shitty segment, a Bob Backlund Randy Savage feud. And we never got it. Figures. Well, we did get the 1-2-3 Kid versus Tony DeVito. I spend most of it getting distracted by Waltman's hideous new perm. If there's one thing that makes the mullet look even worse, it is a stylized mullet. It's funny, too, because Vince spent the entire match talking about how Waltman was going in at less than 100%. I guess he got beat up by Diesel or something on a recent TV taping. So, Vince is telling us how we're not going to see the usual high-flying 1-2-3 Kid. Meanwhile, he just goes in there and does all his usual offense. Totally not selling any body parts or anything. And he ends up going over with the flying leg drop. A decent little TV match for 3 minutes. Very glad the perm look only hung around for a cup of coffee. I have no memory of Sean Waltman ever rocking that hairstyle in the WWF. So I have to assume it did not last long. Vince probably took one look at it and said, "God damn it, pal. The hairstyle's terrible. Go back to the wet look." And once I fast-forwarded through WWF charity softball pre-tapes and the Todd Pettingill Survivor Series card update, and that shaved off about 5 minutes of the show altogether. Then we got King Kong Bundy versus Bert Centeno, where Vince and Savage spent half the match making jokes about male pattern baldness. Apparently, I missed the memo when Bundy actually had hair. I just kind of figured he came out of the womb bald. In any case, Bundy went over with the signature 5 count. I was always a fan of that gimmick. I'm not sure what the finish was exactly. I saw Bundy deliver a sitting knee drop into Centeno's chest, and the next thing I knew, the ref had already counted the pinfall. So I guess it was a crushing blow to the chest via knee. Now, obviously, they got him linked up with DiBiase and the whole $1 Million Corporation. And obviously, we'll see more of that development as we head into 95 in the lead up to WrestleMania. For now, it's more about reestablishing Bundy with the WWF crowd after he'd been away for a while. Hard to say whether or not it's getting over. I mean, I always liked Bundy as a worker, but I've been very outspoken about the whole WWF run from like 94 to 95. It was far from my favorite period of King Kong Bundy's work. But then we had an IRS sketch. He was at John Doe's gravesite, letting him know that he's still a tax cheat, even though he's dead. And he informed us, the viewers at home, that even when we're buried 6 feet underground, we will still have to pay our taxes. Apparently this was supposed to be comedy. I did like IRS saying, if I repossess these flowers, that may be enough to pay off 50% of your debt. Just to let us know how truly corrupt the government is. But yeah, this was pretty stupid. And I was about ready to say the same about this King's Court with Paul Bearer and The Undertaker. But then I remembered who we were dealing with here. And I said, nah, they'll be able to pull it off. They couldn't pull off the shit with the midget clowns. But most definitely, Taker and Bear could make a King's Court segment work. I had no doubt. And they didn't let me down. As wacky as it was, even when you throw in shameless WWF magazine plugs, only Paul Bearer could pull that off. So Lawler brings out Taker and Paul. Of course, they got the lights dimmed, so Lawler's immediately shitting his pants. He goes, can we get a little bit of lighting in the room here? So, of course, Taker does the zombie hand raise and up pop the stage lights. How does he do that? Asks the Macho Man. Years of practice, Randy. Years of practice. Lawler's doing an awesome job here, trying to be a heel and getting under Paul's skin. But at the same time, he knows this 7-foot dead guy standing right next to him. So, while Lawler's trying to be a heat magnet, he's also looking over his shoulder every 3 seconds to watch in case Taker tries to grab him by the goozle pipe. Totally on edge the whole time. But here's the main premise. As Paul Bearer pulls out the WWF-sponsored magazine entitled Undertaker's Gravest Matches, which is a horrible pun, but I love it. And he's flipping through the pages, not directly naming opponents The Undertaker has beaten, but when he gets to Yokozuna's page, they show the image of Taker trying to stuff him inside the casket from back at the Rumble. And, well, when they start getting on the subject of the special guest referee that will be calling the match at Survivor Series, it is none other than Chuck Norris, which I completely forgot was a thing. But that happened. They brought in Chuck Norris to the WWF to be the special guest referee for Undertaker versus Yokozuna in the casket match. Well, for one, I have no idea why. I mean, we all know the WWF loves their celebrity plugs. But Taker promised Yoko would rest in peace, as Paul Bearer looked on with that classic facial expression. Actually, I believe Taker's exact quote to Yokozuna was, "Rest in pee." And considering Yokozuna's been wetting his pants for weeks now anytime he comes in close contact with a casket, it was very apropos. But what do you say about it? It was a WWF segment on Raw in 1994. The exact kind of thing you would expect. But, because Taker and Bear were fucking icons, they made it work. And Lawler was great too. The interactions with Paul Bearer, At the same time, him cowering behind Paul when Taker would take a step toward him. Like, in all honesty, this had no business being as good as it was. But because of the talent involved, they took a D-level segment and made it a B+. Maybe even an A-. Unfortunately, it was the only redeeming quality on this wretched program, because everything else was garbage by comparison. On the topic of garbage, Jim Neidhart versus Tony Roy. Fucking putrid beyond belief. The longest match in the history of mankind. It just went on and on and on and on for an eternity. Neidhart's pounding on the guy. It's the most dull, lifeless squash you've ever seen. And while the announcers are plugging other stuff, I look up at the screen and realize that after the Anvil won with the camel clutch, the match went 4 minutes and 10 seconds. May as well have been a 9-hour Iron Man match. Half of it was blocked by somebody on the hard cam side holding up a giant heart cutout, just flashing it up right in front of the camera. It's almost like it was a warning sign for me to shield my eyes from the horrors happening on the screen. And right before they wrap things up, in what ended up being a very apropos send-off for the week, we had Vince in the back attempting to conduct an interview with Lex Luger, and they picture the feed. Vince is talking into a microphone while Luger is standing there. He's got an ice pack on his shoulder. Naturally, there's no audio, because nothing right can ever happen on this show. So Savage is trying to stall for time as they're looking to fix the issue. And they're cutting back and forth from the ring to the locker room several times. Still no audio. Finally, after about the third or fourth attempt, they do eventually get the audio rolling, only for Tatanka to immediately run in and attack Luger from behind. And we get about 2 seconds of that footage shown before they abruptly cut away and end the program. That is when I wrote down, this is the worst wrestling show of all time. Fuck anybody that ever said those 2000 Nitros were the worst wrestling shows in history. This shit is so much worse, dude. So much worse. And again, not to get all dark and pessimistic before we close the review out here, but I believe this is the final appearance that we see of the Macho Man on WWF television. I remember his contract expired with the company at the end of October, and I think it was only a matter of weeks before we saw him on WCW. It was like an immediate jump. And that was pretty much the nail in the coffin for the Macho Man-Vince McMahon relationship as we knew it. That working agreement was dead in the water from that point forward. It's just a total disaster, this show. One bad thing after another, man. As we're transitioning into the new year, company morale is at an all-time low. Of course, this is all still during the steroid scandal, so Vince is swept up in that right now. Half the roster is completely unmotivated. Hogan's out of the picture. Savage is out of the picture now. It's one bad television show after another, man. Like, the bad comedy stuff, it's reached a breaking point with me. It's fucking horrible, dude. Make no mistake about it. When people say WWF in the early to mid-90s was the dirt worst when it came to this company's history, they're not exaggerating. It is beyond reproach. And this all predates the Monday Night Wars. WCW wasn't in much better shape at this point anyway, but at least you could start to see the landscape changing a little bit now, with most of the big stars from WWF jumping ship. By the time that first Nitro was set to air in September of next year, WCW was riding a wave of momentum. Now, of course, it came crashing down on them toward the end of '97, Again, when they fucked the whole Hogan-Sting feud up. But these really are the dark days of WWF, as we're witnessing them. Going over the timeline again and just remembering how bad things really were. And it's bad, dude. It is bad, bad, bad. And it doesn't get any better from here as we head into 95. It really doesn't. And with that, guess we can move on to talking about this SmackDown Go Home show. Or was it the Go Home show? I guess it was, wasn't it? Yeah, Crown Jewel is next weekend. My motivation is quite high, as you can probably tell. I mean, we'll see how long the card is. I mean, if it's going to be another one of those 16-match extravaganzas, I'll probably wind up just picking a few from the bucket and not spend much time harping on the lesser important stuff. And by that, I mean pretty much anything that's not directly related to LA Knight, Roman Reigns, or Logan Paul. I don't even know what they have announced for the Raw side of things yet. Hopefully not another Rollins-Nakamura garbage fest. Maybe I'll gloss over the card at the end here and see what horrors await us. But before we do that, let me talk to you about this opening segment with the two hottest stars on the show. Arguably the two hottest guys in the entire company. With everybody saying his name, LA Knight. Yeah. And Roman. And I'll tell you what. It takes a lot of energy these days to get me to care about contract signing segments in wrestling. God, you want to talk about angle ideas that have been run into the ground. And they've run the contract signing angle into the core of the earth. Just played this thing out to death over the years. And it usually ends the exact same way every time. Someone gets beaten up or put through a table. Well, somehow, even with all those stereotypes in place, they made it work. And they did a lot of nice subtle things here that I thought were really well shot and performed. You get LA Knight interrupting Roman during his entrance at the top of the program, storms right past him without even acknowledging his existence. Of course, Roman's looking on flustered like, did this dumb son of a bitch just disrespect me like that? Who does he think he is? Great little story arc here where they got the table set up in the ring with one chair at the head and then one chair on the side. So, of course, Knight immediately plops his butt at the head of the table and keeps the disrespect going. Roman at this point is still slowly edging his way toward the ring while Knight's doing the poses and soaking in the spotlight. Like, they're just totally giving him the Steve Austin treatment at this point. But I love the way it was all done. LA Knight didn't waste any time signing on the dotted line. He says, we all know what we're here for, so let's bag it and move on. And of course, Roman's trying to pay the disrespect back by saying that LA Knight's new to all this. He's never even sniffed the title picture in WWE before, so he obviously doesn't know how this all works. You know, Roman's trying to take his time signing the contract, pretending like the pen doesn't work. That was a nice touch. Of course, the fans heckle him and start chanting, Roman scared. Which I think got a pop out of Roman because he started laughing to himself. But again, it was all great. LA Knight cut a hell of a babyface promo, which was a major turnaround from the last several promos I've heard him cut. Remember, I even said last week, I haven't really been digging LA Knight's babyface promos like I did his heel ones. Well, whatever he did to flip that switch in the last 7 days, he needs to keep that momentum going. Because he was awesome here. Totally in his element. Told Roman he only needs one shot, one chance to get the job done. And after Roman's done wondering to himself what the hell happened, realizing he's no longer the Universal Champion, he's no longer the head of the table, well, then he can turn his attention to acknowledging the new head of the table, his name being L.A. Knight. Of course, that's when Roman flips the table over on Knight and starts trying to put the boots to him. And the little brawl they shot was fine. They weren't really laying much in, but yeah, they had Jimmy Uso run out there and get put through the table, so that protected Roman from having to be the fall guy. On the other hand, Knight got to stand tall. Really no complaints about the opening segment here. A rare contract signing gem in WWE history. Now, of course, you look at the parties involved and you understand why it worked. And again, man, if I actually had faith that they were going to put the strap on Knight this coming weekend, I'd probably be more stoked about this than I am at the moment. I love both these guys as talents. Ideally, if the stars aligned properly, you can make the argument this would be LA Knight's crowning moment. You know, if they actually had a booking committee that listened to the fans and made necessary changes on the fly, regardless of what the initial decisions were. But I just keep having this bad thought in the back of my head that it's all being done to further along Roman's title reign into next year with not really having much in line for LA Knight. You know, if I actually thought they maybe had something bigger in store for him after the fact, I'd probably be fine with him doing the job to Roman at Crown Jewel. I just don't want to see the guy's momentum derailed after the fact. You know, and if Knight walks out of that match without the belt, what's next for him? Does WWE even have it planned out? That's the problem. I like the segment. I'm just worried about the end result. I'm worried that this is all being done for short-term effect, and that they really don't have anything else lined up for LA Knight after the fact, which would be a terrible decision. But from there, in the 57th installment of how many different ways can we pair the LWO with Lashley and the Street Profits, now this week, they did Carlito and Escobar versus the Street Profits, which wasn't bad, except for a couple choppy spots involving Carlito. It was just incredibly boring and uninteresting, much like how the entire LWO Lashley and Profits feud has been boring and uninteresting. I mean, Carlito's flip dive before the break spot was hilarious. Literally looked like guys sinking into quicksand with how everybody bumped on the floor. Carlito lands on Dawkins and Ford, and all three guys just slowly sink like molasses before finally falling to the ground. Looked hilarious. So they're doing this match, and while Escobar and Carlito are trying to make the comeback, Logan Paul is shown in the back punching out Rey Mysterio, who was watching the match on a monitor, at which point, in the dumbest move of all time, Escobar looks at Carlito and he tells him, "Go get him." So, like a fucking dumbass, Carlito just bails. He leaves his own tag team partner to fend for himself. And golly, wouldn't you know it, folks? You'll never guess what happened. Sure enough, Escobar gets overwhelmed by the numbers advantage, and he gets pinned with a sit-out sky-high neckbreaker combo. Who'd have thunk it? Could have called that finish in my sleep. And, well, if you're wondering, Did we ever hear whether or not Carlito found Logan Paul in the back? Well, the answer was no. It was never addressed. So they really are the world's dumbest babyfaces. I mean, we keep calling the Escobar heel turn. We know it's coming. Eventually. But God, are they making this fucker look like a moron. Like, it's one thing to flip a guy heel because he's not getting the job done as a babyface. Can we not make him look like an idiot in the process? Just a simple ask. Speaking of idiots and bumbling buffoons, got to admit, I think I'm starting to get a kick out of Jimmy Uso, the bloodline bumbling buffoon. Now, granted, they're starting to teeter on the verge of too much comedy with it, and I do caution them not to overexert themselves. But, well, after Paulie and Roman made fun of the Green Bay Packers and started trolling the hometown crowd, we get Jimmy Uso coming in, plopping himself on the couch, doing an horrific job of selling the ribs after getting put to the table earlier. Of course, that's why it was so great. And of course, Roman's playing off of him perfectly by asking, what happened out there? And Jimmy's like, I ran the play, Chief. I called an audible. Roman goes, you ran the wrong play is what you did. By far, though, best part of this entire show, Roman goes, you got to deal with this LA Knight problem tonight. And Jimmy leans up and he goes, I can't, dog. I'm on the injured reserve list. I can't do anything. And Roman, with the most disgusted look on his face, turns and goes, you're what? And without hesitation, Jimmy goes, I said I'm off the injured reserve list. I can do something. And Roman goes, okay, good. That's what I thought. Fucking marvelous. I could not do it justice. It was like easily the best thing Jimmy Uso's ever done in his entire career. Now, again, I do want to caution them to be careful with the comedy aspect of it. For throwaway lines like that, yeah, you can get away with it. But there was an element of hokiness to this segment, and I think they need to be careful not to overdo it, because once it starts getting into AEW levels of bad comedy, then I'm going to start giving them pushback, where it just becomes totally obvious they're hamming it up for the camera. Hopefully they avoid that. I mean, we are dealing with professionals on this show, by and large. But even so, like, when you compare that to the next segment, again, they're getting a little too cute with the comedy stuff. The whole Kevin Owens, Austin Theory, Grayson Fodder pre-tape here, where they're all standing there arguing over whether or not Owens would punch him in the face. And of course, the payoff, to the shock of nobody, Owens punched him in the face in very cartoonish fashion. And it was a literal cartoon. Theory and Fodder looked at the camera while mocking KO. Owens' right arm came bursting in from the side view, punched him in the jaw, complete with sound effects. And then they took a bump. Literally, the only thing missing was the POW symbol flashing up on screen before they cut away. What was this? Was this a Hunter idea? I mean, this whole thing had Hunter's fingerprints all over it. The stagey, hokey, bad skits that reek of DX comedy. I mean, I know Vince isn't around to oversee anything anymore. I hope to God we don't get more of this stuff, because this was really bad. I mean, I can tolerate fun banter between Roman and Jimmy, the main event guys. Not this stuff. This was manufactured and not funny in the slightest. But, well, at this point, I already had to get up and take a leak. I was like, maybe there will be another infomercial where I can step out and drain the cow. Maybe Pretty Dreadly will show up on camera. Well, it wasn't Pretty Dreadly. It was not an infomercial. But it was the perfect Drain the Cow segment. A Botch Z versus Chelsea Green match. And as soon as I saw the graphic pop up, I said, excellent. Not only can I get that piss break in, I can also probably brew another cup of coffee before having to come back in the room. So that was a good 5 minutes I shaved off right there. Just in time to come back to see John Cena making his way to the ring. My claim that the man never bathes or changes clothing continues to be validated. He's still wearing the same thing he wore for the last 3 months. And, well, the long and short of it is, he's out there doing another I Feel the Energy in the Room promos. It's all the same horseshit jingoisms we've heard from the guy for the last 20 years. He's trying to get sympathy from the crowd, talking about how Crown Jewel is a must-win for him because if he loses, then he has nowhere else to go. And like, I mean, it's such a stupid promo because the entire premise is, if I lose this match to Solo, then everything I worked so hard for the last 20 years goes away. I lose the fan support, I lose respect, and I lose my career. To which I, the rational speaking person in the room, simply asks, why? Why does losing to Solo Sikoa at Crown Jewel signal the end of John Cena's career? Is it a retirement match? Did Cena sign a contract indicating that if he loses to Solo, he will never wrestle again? I don't remember that being part of the deal. I mean, the whole thing is so dumb. Now, eventually we do get Paul Heyman coming out to lull Cena into a false sense of security. You know, he comes out there and puts over how when Cena was drafted from OVW to SmackDown back in 2002, it was Paul that greenlit the decision. He says Cena is the best communicator in the history of the sport. But all that could be taken away if Solo hits him with the Oriental Spike. So, of course, it all leads to Solo coming in to blindside John Cena from behind. And he proceeds to lay him out with the spike. To which my immediate thought was, so is that the story payoff? The whole setup was, if Solo hits the spike on Cena, it could spell the end of John Cena ever being able to cut a promo ever again. So about 15 seconds later, here comes Solo. He hits John Cena with the spike. And that was it. So I presume that is the end of John Cena's ability to ever speak on the show ever again. In kayfabe. We'll see if he bothers to sell it. Because if there's one thing we know about Super Cena, he's the master at selling. All the hardcores just rolled their eyes. I mean, whatever, it is what it is. At the end of the day, having Cena go over at Crown Jewel really doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, I have to assume they have him win, but again, for what? You know, they keep teasing the retirement angle with him, talking about how he doesn't have much left in the tank anymore. I'm interested to see what the actual retirement match for this guy is going to be. I mean, I can't imagine it's going to be against Solo. That's something you'd probably say for a Braun Breaker if you're really trying to throw people for a loop. I mean, I highly doubt it would be against Roman, although it's possible. LA Knight's always an option too. I know they were teasing that at one point when Cena was the special guest ref for that LA Knight Miz match earlier this year. Overall, I mean, the segment really didn't do much for me. Solo versus Cena doesn't really interest me, if I'm being honest. I'm sort of bored with the whole John Cena run at this point. Like, he's just kind of there to do promos and shoot the occasional angles on television. But, I mean, if we're being transparent about it, why is he there? What's the big money match we're building to? I mean, I've been trying to figure that out for the last several months. They've already done him and Roman. That's not really exploring any new ground. LA Knight's a babyface now, so that option's out the window unless you want to do a babyface match. I think it's got to be an eventual NXT call-up. Breaker is sort of the go-to just because it makes the most sense on paper. If you're really trying to force a new guy over, I guess. I'm just wondering what the purpose for this run is. Aside from popping the occasional number on television. And I guess to let us know that John Cena's old, broken down, and still can't wrestle a match without being obvious about calling spots, which we already knew about. So up next, we had Dragon Lee versus Cedric Alexander, which was one of those modern indie gymnastics matches, just toned down and done on a moderately professional level because this isn't AEW. It wasn't choreographed parkour. I mean, I've seen a few Dragon Lee matches over the years. I'm not really well-versed enough into his background to tell you that much about him. The name was recognizable. I mean, I probably saw a handful of his AEW stuff and thought nothing of it because then he'd be gone for another 7 months before randomly popping back up again. I mean, what he did here with Cedric was fine. It's just kind of another one of those cases where you got a generic-looking small guy under a mask who can do a lot of cool flips and stunts. I mean, AEW, you got like 40 of those guys. And WWE already has Ray on a full-time basis, so I don't know. Maybe it's the presentation of him, but Dragon Lee doesn't really come off as anything special right now. He ended up going over with that wacky reverse tornado DDT that I've seen Naito use in New Japan before. I always forget what that move was called. I can hear, what's-his-face, Kevin Kelly screaming it, but the word's not coming to mind. Like, as a showcase match, it was fine. I think it's one of the first things we've seen them do with Dragon Lee on TV, outside a couple random tags and angles involving the LWO that never went anywhere. Okay, cool. They called him up. You would think they have a purpose for him. So what do you do with him? I don't have anything against the guy. I just don't really have much of an opinion one way or the other. Maybe that'll change. Maybe it won't. Tell you what, though. I still haven't changed my mind about Bianca Belair coming back as a babyface. I still don't really agree with that decision. But she was back this week to follow up on her return from the previous episode, touching on the fallout and the whole return, saving Charlotte, that whole deal. And, you know, she kind of went over the story of what led to that point, talking about how she's gained the reputation for being somebody that would get up after being knocked down, and she'd do it with a smile. Run her down in the parking lot, she'll get back up with a smile and twirl her hair around. Break into her home and beat her dog while she watches. She'll get right back up with a smile and twirl the hair around. Maybe shake her booty a little bit for the camera. Nothing could keep a smile off Bianca's face. That was until she got jumped by Damage Control and put on the shelf for 2 months. And now was the point where she couldn't let it go. She was overcome with rage. To which I asked, because you got hit in the back with a folding chair? That was the breaking point? That was where you decided, this is no laughing matter. You can screw me out of my title, but by God, you take a folding chair to my spinal column. That tears it. So she went to Nick Aldis, and she got her rematch with Io Sky confirmed for Crown Jewel. But that's not all. She also has Bayley for next week's show. Because, well, it was apparently her decision. She wanted to intentionally soften herself up for the title rematch by facing Bayley 24 hours before her actual scheduled title match. That was her plan. What is it with stupid baby faces on this show? Seriously, why the fuck would you do that? I mean, I had no idea what was going on here, but it was also weird. She said she would not stop until she took out every member of Damage Control, at which point she proceeds to mention Bayley and Io. No mention of Dakota Kai. Are we to believe she's no longer affiliated with the group? I mean, I could have sworn I saw her out there during a couple Damage Control segments. Come to think of it, I don't really remember the last time I saw her booked in a match. Maybe she's hurt. I don't know. I mean, she wrestles, what, 4 times in a given year? I don't know how she got hurt. I mean, the one good thing to come out of this was no mention of Charlotte. I hope they keep it that way for a while. But you never know with this fucking company. I mean, Io and Bianca had that really good title match earlier this year. One of the better modern women's matches I've seen in God knows how long. So who knows? Maybe history will repeat itself. So long as they keep botchy Charlotte out of the picture. But with that, we come to the main event with LA Knight and Jimmy Uso. And kind of like the solo match from the previous week, it was mostly a formality. We all knew who was going over here, and that's fine. I don't really know if we needed 13 minutes to get the point across. I mean, Jimmy Uso is far from the most compelling heat magnet, so watching him work overnight for like 6 or 7 of those 13 minutes was far from enthralling. But when Knight hit that big superplex at the end, and he put away Jimmy with the BFT, got a big pop. The dude's massively over. I mean, the people are ready for it. They really want to see it. Those LA Knight chants are blowing through the roof. I think the people are really ready to see the guy beat Roman. It's just so unlikely to happen, it almost sucks the air out of the room. Which is kind of what I'm expecting to go down at Crown Jewel. Like, man, you look at the finish of the show here, even LA Knight laying out Roman with the BFT, like that got an even bigger pop than any bump Jimmy took in the entire match. One move. That's all it took. You just think about that same spot happening in an environment like Saudi Arabia. They do that exact same spot. But this time it's LA Knight pinning Roman's shoulders down for the 3 count. and you get that visual of him holding up the world title to close out the show. So many what-if scenarios. So much room to speculate. Yet so much room to be left disappointed. But that's all the match was, really. It was a fine TV main event to put overnight and give you every possible indication that he's destined to beat Roman in Saudi Arabia when there's like 0% chance of it actually happening. A fever dream of sorts. No. Mathematically, it's more like a 5% chance of happening. I'm too lazy to break out the Steiner calculator to do the math, but we'll just say very improbable. Now, obviously, just to kind of give you the game plan for next weekend, since we are going to review that Crown Jewel show, I'm not going to talk about SmackDown. That's just way too much stuff to try to pack into one weekend. And I've already overextended myself with trying to review 4 or 5 segments for a Monday podcast before, and it's too much, at least for me. So when we reconvene with SmackDown in a couple weeks, it'll be post-Saudi. By that point, we'll kind of have a general idea of what they do with that main event. I'm not giving my hopes up. But even when you remove the Reigns and Knight match from the equation, I have the wiki page open right now. What else is there on this card right now? Okay, you got Logan Paul and Rey Mysterio for the U.S. title, and that could be interesting. If for anything, to see Escobar probably cost Rey the belt, so there's that pending angle in the works there. You got Bianca and Io for the women's title, which could be a good match. Again, they had that really fantastic title match earlier this year at one of the premium live specials. Maybe they'll make magic happen again. Cody Rhodes and Damian Priest. Okay. I mean, haven't we already kind of seen some combination of that match like a million times by now? Solo and Cena is kind of whatever. Not really sure about this girls' 5-way. Even with Rhea involved. I don't really know if I need to see the other females. Rollins and McIntyre for the World Heavyweight title. Okay. At least it's not Shinsuke again. I mean, like, there's definitely stuff that looks all right on paper. 7 matches doesn't seem that bad. Just as long as they don't try to drag the show on for more than 4 hours, which they probably will. But again, I think the story of that show is going to be centered around what they do for that Universal title match. Again, if Roman wins, where does it leave LA Knight in the pecking order? Back to square one? How does that translate to television as we approach Rumble season? Will that hostile, passionate WWE fan base make their voices heard? It's hard to tell. WWE loves fucking with their fan base. That is well known. I guess we just wait for Hunter to come out on SmackDown and say, "It's best for business, And that's where we know things will stand as we go into 2024. All right, so there were a couple things of note with NXT this week. By the way, have you all noticed that Brad Maddox has totally fallen off the face of the earth? What happened to that guy? Wasn't he serving as interim GM or matchmaker right before they brought JBL on board as the main guy in charge? Just something I noticed. Now, this was a pretty short episode altogether. I think runtime for it was like 39 minutes or something. With where they were in the taping schedule, I have to assume this was one of the final ones they shot, because we really didn't have much in the way of star power this week, which is understandable. I mean, we're only 2 weeks removed from the Zayn Dallas NXT title match, and they were shooting the angles with Neville and Graves last week, so it was kind of slim pickings. Now, we did open up with Enzo and Cass versus Rusev and Sylvester Lefort. First time I think we're seeing Lefort actually wrestle on this program. And, you know, not cutting borderline indecipherable promos with thick French accents. I mean, he actually had a pretty good physique. You could tell he was a gym bro. I don't know about that spray tan. That was a little off-putting. But he's definitely trying to look like somebody. Nobody I'd be able to pick out of a police lineup, but points for effort. We did have Enzo and Cass call the heels chicken tenders. Because, you know, they're cowards. They cheat. They run for cover whenever they're in trouble. Chicken tenders. Only Enzo Amore could have gotten away with saying that line. Cass is still incredibly uncomfortable on the microphone at this stage in his career. Total deer in the headlights. But again, he's trying. And he would get better with improvement. So I can't knock him. With that said, this was a total Rusev showcase by every sense of the word. He dominated the entire 90-second match, beat up everybody in sight single-handedly, including his own tag partner. So I guess that team is no longer a thing. The Legionnaires, or whatever they were going by for all 3 weeks. He put the accolade on Cass for the submission, and that was it. And as he was celebrating, out comes Lana, looking F-I-N-E fine this week. And her and Rusev eventually left together while Renee was asking, "Who's the blonde?" Which is not the kind of question I was expecting to hear from Renee, soon-to-be Paquette. I think she was still Renee Young by this point. Her and Mox were in the dating stages of their relationship. Or whatever you would call that relationship, I really don't know. But it was just an odd question. Somewhat disparaging in delivery. Still kind of humorous. I don't think the average person would walk up to somebody and say, "Who's the blonde?" It usually has a negative connotation associated with it. But that was that. Like I said, they're definitely smashing over this Alexander Rusev. I mean, I think it was only 2 months out from this point where I'm sure he was getting called up to the main roster, right? I don't think he's in NXT that much longer. So then we had a total turn the channel heat segment. They brought out this fucking Aiden English for another sing-along squash. And I just can't with these overly scripted Broadway parodies anymore. This gimmick is total death TV. As a professional musician, I can tell you this gravely offends me. And I have a pretty thick backbone. He wrestled Jason Jordan this week. This also predates American Alpha, so Jordan was just an enhancement fodder here. William Regal spent the entire match jacking himself off to Aiden English's vocal performance. Meanwhile, I just sat there looking at how pale and skinny the fucking guy was. I mean, he was definitely in shape. He did not slack off on the cardio. But, I mean, if anybody forgets what this guy looked like, go look at a picture of him on Google Images. Again, like, he has a physique. He has a body. But he just has no bulk to him. Especially in the upper body. I don't know, maybe it would be less noticeable if he had a tan. I mean, that would at least mask it a little bit. But, I don't know. It's just one of those weird visuals. But the match mostly sucked. His finish is terrible, too. The director's cut. It's one of those going around your elbow to get to your wrist moves where it just looks incredibly weird and awkward to set up. The ironic thing is, he is also taking his own bump. It's not him just dropping the guy into an STO from a standing position. He has to literally turn his entire body around and essentially take his own back bump. Wouldn't that hurt both guys? If this were real? Or am I just overthinking all this? I don't know. But yeah, another quick 90-second squash. Really nothing much else to say. The fans chanted encore. I chanted commercial. Unfortunately, with what was to come next, as soon as I saw the next segment, I immediately regretted that chant. By the way, there was an Adrian Neville pre-tape where he basically vowed revenge on Corey Graves. It was a fine promo if you can get over how incredibly thick Neville's UK accent was. What wasn't fine, however, was Paige versus Summer Rae for the NXT Divas title. I am not exaggerating when I tell you, from the opening bell, the opening fucking bell, the first move, not a lockup, they run at each other, they grab each other's hair like two schoolgirls, they both begin screaming as loud as humanly possible, they're tugging back and forth on one another. And that is when I officially determined anybody that says women's wrestling was great during this period can lick my butthole. This shit is horrible. Horrible, I say. So they're out there having this horrendous match. Summer Rae has to be one of the worst wrestlers I've ever seen, male or female. I never thought much of Saraya Knight, Paige, whatever you want to call her to begin with. But her trying to work around Summer Rae here was like pulling teeth. I mean, they may as well have just put a fucking broom in there. Paige probably could have gotten a better match out of it. During the break spot, they had one of those Raw rebound infomercials. I'm going to sidetrack here for a minute. Do you all remember what was happening on the main roster with the world title picture during this period in 2013? Do you remember what the big title feud was in the lead up to their Survivor Series event? Randy Orton versus The Big Show for the coveted WWE World Championship. Randy fucking Orton and the Big fucking Show in a singles match in 2013. No wonder people were migrating to NXT in spades. Look at the main event scene on Raw this day 10 years ago. Randy Orton versus The Big Show was main eventing a WWE pay-per-view. A Big Four pay-per-view, no less. God, this period of the business was the utter shits. How did people watch this? Now, with that said, it was still probably miles better than the girls' match I just watched. At one point during the heat section of this match, Summer Rae was putting Paige in all these fake-looking submissions where she basically just kept wrapping her giant legs around various limbs. I was like, is this chick wrestling right now, or is she trying to show Paige her stretch exercises? What is going on? Who's training her? And finally, after like 9 minutes of excruciating, terrible ring action, Paige just hits a page turner from out of nowhere and wins. Just like that. There was no setup. There was no comeback. No nothing. Summer had her by the hair. Paige gave her one kick to the gut. And then she hit her move and won. Putrid. But of course, couldn't end there. Because we needed to have an afterbirth. We need to shoot a post-match to see the girls continue fighting. In a very contrived angle. And I don't even remember what happened here. I know Emma got involved, and she was trying to fight Sasha Banks at one point. And then somehow, I think I was supposed to believe that when Paige came over to try and pull Emma back out of the corner, that Emma just turned around and blindly struck her in the face, thinking it was Summer Rae. Okay. Hypothetically, sure, there are ways to make that work. The problem is she was looking directly at Paige for about 5 seconds before clocking her in the face. She knew she was standing there. So was it premeditated? Or is Emma just really bad at timing? I don't know what the hell was going on here. But apparently they're still trying to tease this Emma Paige program. God, I remember when people were raving about how awesome that match was. Paige and Emma. I remember nothing about it. But you know what? Anything is better than Summer Rae. That's my takeaway from all this. Women's Revolution. Remember that. And then for our TV main event, we had Tyler Breeze versus CJ Parker, round 2. The unfortunate reverse psychology trend continues for poor CJ. In a feud where he's supposed to be the clear-cut babyface and Breeze is supposed to be the heel, well, naturally, the NXT crowd is firmly behind Breeze. It's like a 99-to-1 ratio. Somewhere in the Full Sail crowd, there's one hippie fan holding up a CJ Parker sign. The rest of them are chanting, "Breeze is gorgeous," for the entire length of the match. I mean, it wasn't bad. There just wasn't any heat for it because Tyler Breeze was way over with the crowd. One thing I took away from this was how outdated the show was in hindsight. At one point, Renee was talking about Instagram, and the announcers had no idea what she was referring to. And they barely even heard of Twitter by that point. So Renee, on live television, had to explain the gimmick of Instagram. There's a way to make yourself feel old. When did Instagram become a thing? Was it really only 10 years ago? I know they changed their logo or their icon. Let's see. It was originally released on October 6th, 2010. 13 years ago. Well, that sounds like WWE being way behind the times and only picking up on social media about 3 or 4 years after the fact. So anyway, Juice is making the comeback. The crowd's booing everything he does. Very lukewarm response. And after Breeze misses a spinning sidekick, Parker gives him the palm thrust and pins him. To which the crowd booed. Who'da thunk it? They did not approve of CJ Parker going over Tyler Breeze in this grudge match. And again, I think it all goes back to the gimmick. And we talked about how it got so bad with the poor guy, he basically had to leave WWE and go over to Japan to reinvent himself. It's just one of those things, unfortunately. They saddled him with a rotten gimmick, didn't get over, people didn't care. By the time 2014 rolls around, CJ Parker was kind of a non-entity on this show. I mean, I don't remember how much longer his contract lasts, but I imagine this was kind of the turning point for him. Realizing he was going nowhere fast, working this fake 70s hippie shtick. Meanwhile, Breeze is picking up more momentum as the weeks go by. Now, they're still going against the grain with him as a heel. I don't know if that ever changes, but I don't know. The whole thing's fucked up. But that was NXT. Probably the weakest show we reviewed thus far in this little retro review series. I mean, it wasn't astoundingly horrible. It wasn't embarrassing. It wasn't like retro Raw. But there just wasn't really much to cover on it. You know, again, the key talents were mostly kept off the show. The girls' match was atrocious. The squashes were mostly kind of there. You know, we already saw Breeze and Parker once before. I didn't really think much of their first match. This one was just more of that prototypical 50-50 booking mentality where WWE had to give Parker his win back, even though nobody wanted to see it. I imagine it'll set up some kind of rubber match in a few weeks, and that'll probably be where Breeze goes over and they kind of put that feud to closure. But that's really it. Not much more to say. So I guess we can wrap things up on that note. So here's the deal for this coming week. Friday evening, I'll be leaving. I'll be out of town. I should be able to get the Friday podcast edited and uploaded before the end of the day. Famous last words. I hate making promises like that. But it should be fine because I usually record things on either Thursday night or Friday morning. So we should be fine there. But I'll be away all the way through Sunday. So I'm going to have to find time while I'm out of town to watch that Crown Jewel show. In the meantime, pre-planning for next Monday, we'll do the NXT report. We'll do Retro Raw. We're gonna omit SmackDown from the report, and we'll just do the Crown Jewel review. And that'll about cover that. In the meantime, because we are coming up in November, we got some big shows coming up. I need to find a way to fit the Starrcade 87 review in there. And I haven't decided if I'm going to do that for the Friday or the Monday show yet. We'll see. Can't remember if it's the same weekend as Survivor Series. Guess I can take a look real quick. So Starrcade 87 was November 26th. Yeah, let's see what Survivor Series this year is. I'm pretty sure that's next pay-per-view for WWE. Yep, sure enough. November 25th. So that'll probably end up tying into the same weekend. In that case, I might need to really make some adjustments. We'll see. I mean, in that case, I'll probably leave out the Retro Raw review for the go-home show because there's really no purpose in talking about that. So we'll cover Survivor Series. We'll probably cover the Starrcade review on the same show. Maybe fit the NXT report in there. I got to see how much time I have. I mean, 2 pay-per-views is lengthy in and of itself. Again, I'm trying not to overextend myself anymore. Doing like 4 or 5 segments on a podcast. I don't have the energy. I don't have the time. It's just one of those things. So I'll keep you in the loop. How about that? All right. So thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you comment, subscribe, like the show, do all that. Check us out on Rumble, too, if YouTube is not your thing. And we'll catch you guys on Friday for the next classic review series. Thanks. Peace out.